This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times, no matter when.
Welcome, art lovers. I know you've all been waiting to hear about Marc Chagall, and I hope I don't disappoint you. You read in the write-up about this class that he was a Russian-born, French, Jewish, modernist painter. They're the suitable adjectives to describe him, who became a major 20th century art figure. He first trained in art in Vitebsk, which was a very small town. I'll show you a little bit about it in a moment. And then he went to St. Petersburg, which of course was at that time the capital before Moscow became the capital. And then he moved to Paris, which was the art center of the whole world, I think undisputably. It wasn't until the Second World War before America and New York took over from Paris as the art center. But at that time, Paris was definitely the art center of the world. And Chagall was a craftsman, a painter, and he painted in oils, in pastels, in watercolors, in gouache. He made lithographs and etchings, and he was also an illustrator for books, and we'll talk about that later. And he also demonstrated his versatility in theater work. He did sets and costumes, and he did sculpture and ceramics and stained glass, and we'll talk about that later in the course. But throughout his career, he incorporated elements from many schools of modern art, including Cubism, Fauvism, and I'll explain these schools of art, symbolism and surrealism. But he really developed his own unique style. And his style involved fantasy, figurative and narrative painting, and a touch of whimsy. Chagall's favorite themes were Jewish folklore, stories from the Bible, illustrating the circus, and often included scenes from his hometown of Vitebsk. And according to the art critic, Robert Hughes, he had a lyric, flyaway, enraptured imagination with wry, sweet, and irrepressibly meshugana visions. Meshugana is Yiddish for crazy. Later in his career, when he was in his 70s and 80s, Chagall turned to stained glass, crafting magnificent windows for cathedrals like Reims and Metz, and for the United Nations, the Art Institute of Chicago, churches in England, France, Zurich, USA, as well as a synagogue in Jerusalem at Hadassah Medical Center. Many of the works have been granted landmark status, and others can be found in almost every museum in the developed world. Now, I have put in my email address here, as you see, and the reason for that is that sometimes if you don't get a chance to ask the question during the lecture, or you're embarrassed to ask in front of the whole class, you can email me with any questions you may have, any comments or suggestions that don't get answered during the presentation. Okay, now we skipped something. The first thing I wanted to do is you should have received that from the staff at the Fromm is the class schedule. We meet every Wednesday afternoon from 1 to 2:40 on Zoom. And I know that some of you are actually at the Fromm Institute watching this presentation. So this is the schedule for the whole semester. We will start with an introduction, and then I'm going to show you some of his self-portrait. His self-portraits. I've got about 24 self-portraits that he did, and they will be an opportunity to show you some of his artwork throughout his life, because he did self-portraits when he was a young student and then throughout his career. Then we will move to what I call the early years, 1887 to 1910, which was his first paintings in Russia. He then, in the next week, will deal with his Paris years, which was his first time in Paris was 1911 to 1914. Then he went home for his sister's wedding and got caught in with the beginning of World War I in Russia and could not return to Paris. And you will see some of the work that he did after he'd been in Paris for 3 or 4 years, and before he went back to Paris after the war. But he couldn't leave the Soviet Union until 1922, and he went back to Berlin, where he was already recognized, and in 1923 he returned to Paris and lived there until the Second World War. We'll then go on to what I call the restless decade, the period of 1930 to 41, leading up to and beginning the Second World War. And then he fled. I'll tell you about his exile in America. And by that time, he had international fame and fortune, and we'll get into some of his later work. Then we will consider Chagall as a painter of biblical subjects because he did whole Bible illustration and a lot of biblical art, related art. And finally, in the last class, we will talk about some of his wall paintings, ceilings, stained glass windows, mosaics. If you have been at the Paris Opera, you will have seen the ceiling is done by Chagall. If you've been to New York Metropolitan Opera, you have seen his wall paintings there. So that's the outline of what we will cover. And we'll move on now to a little bit of, I also have asked the Fromm administration to send you a reading list or references. These are some of the references that I have used, and there's many, many books on it. This one here, My Life, is actually a sort of autobiography that he wrote and illustrated, and it has black and white illustrations of his early life. Then there are several well-illustrated, often in color, books that I can recommend. The Chagall by Jean Gassot, the Chagall published by Taschen, and the Phaidon Chagall in 1998 is a very comprehensive reference book. The Bible one in the bottom right-hand corner had a long incubation period. The 1987 date is just the publication of the American version in English, but he worked on that from 1931 until and through the Second World War, and it wasn't published until 1956. Of course, at that time, it was published by a French publisher, so it was in French, but later there were English translations. And that has illustrations that he did of the Bible stories that were etchings, acid etchings, and black and white. But some of the painting, some of those etchings have been hand colored. And then there is, of course, his stained glass windows, and that book only recently appeared, 2016. It's hard to get in the library, and it's quite expensive, but it does have a wonderful works of his. So let's start with where he was from. He was from Vitebsk, which in the map is up here. It's right near the border of Lithuania and Latvia, which are up here, and here's Estonia, and up here is St. Petersburg. But actually, this was all part of the Russian Empire. And he was Jewish, and as a consequence, Jews weren't allowed to live anywhere, not where they wanted to, but were confined by a law established by Catherine the Great in 1791. The Jews were to live only in what was called the Pale of Settlement, which involved what is now, in the 21st century, 7 countries. Belarus, which is where Vitebsk is now, Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, which is over here, and Latvia and Russia. If they wanted to go to St. Petersburg, as he did, to study art, he had to get permission, and that was very difficult to get. If he wanted to go to Moscow or anywhere else in this part of Russia, they had to have special permits and weren't allowed to reside permanently there. So it was, that's the background to where he was from. And Vitebsk itself was a relatively small town here, and it grew because it was on the railway line. And here's Vitebsk, here's Moscow, and here is Warsaw. So it was right when the railway was built. It became a sort of stopping place between Moscow and Warsaw. And it was also, if you wanted to go from Warsaw up to St. Petersburg, you would go through Vitebsk. So that through that it grew in population, but it was about a population of about 50,000, of which half of them were Jewish, and they lived in a sort of a separate shtetl, wooden houses, poor houses, and then they were mostly tradespeople, manufacturing, and shopkeeping, and they had survived pogroms and prejudice and segregation and discrimination, and the Jews had their own schools, their own synagogues, hospitals, and the cemetery. And Vitebsk became a stronghold of Hasidic Judaism, which it was since the end of the 18th century. And in the Second World War, it was totally demolished. The whole town and city was destroyed. So now I'm using his self-portraits as a way to tell you something about his family. He was born Moshe Zakharovich Chagall. And Chagall is actually a version of Siegel. And Zakharovich just means he's the son of Zachar, which was his father's name. And his father was a laborer who worked for a herring merchant and earned a paltry 20 rubles a month. So it was and he was the oldest son. There were 9 children, and his mother, Ida Chagall, worked in the family home, and on the side she ran a grocery store, a retail grocery store, which supplemented the income. And for him to study art, she had to bribe officials so that he could go to St. Petersburg. First, he studied in Vitebsk, but then he went on to St. Petersburg to get further training. And the main he in his early childhood he painted mostly family circle and some. I'll show you some of his early work. He painted his sister and his father and so forth. So, but he went from Vitebsk to St. Petersburg for the School of Imperial Society for the Protection of the Arts. And his teacher there was a guy called Röhrig, who designed sets and costumes for Stravinsky's Rites of Spring. So he was introduced very early in his training, not only in painting, but also in doing sets and costumes for theater and for ballet. And that served him well later on. And not only that, his teacher in St. Petersburg was able to get him out of the required military service because in Russia, if you were called up into the military, that was a long-term sentence. It wasn't just a couple of years, it was a long time. So he by being an art student, he was able to avoid the draft. And he also, his teacher was able to get him a very small scholarship. And the two paintings you see here, one from 1907, he would have been about 20 years old at that time. And the one in 1909, you see him with a beret and curly hair and carrying his palette and paints in his right hand. Actually, it's his left hand because it's in self-portraits, it's always done in the mirror. This self-portrait is a very well-known one. This is painted in 1912, 1913, and it shows him in a sort of Cubist variant, the way his face is painted here, and you see here his face is sort of divided in the Cubist style, but he already is showing the two influences on his art: Paris, which became his second home, and the Eiffel Tower is symbolic of that. And then this is his memory of Vitebsk, and he has these memories in many of his paintings. But also, it's called the self-portrait with 7 fingers. Now, what's that about? Well, there's a Yiddish expression, it's a folk expression, mit alle 7 Finger, which means with all 7 fingers. And it means working very fast or very hard as possible. And he did certainly work hard, because when he came to Paris, he had nothing. And he lived in extreme poverty. So he worked very hard. And Paris became his second home. The broken puzzle-like appearance of the objects in the painting is the Cubist influence. And that Cubism in 1912 was a very popular style that had been brought in. We'll talk about that in a later slide by Picasso and Braque. And he has in this painting, he has a painting in the painting, which is he does quite often, and other artists do it. It shows a milkmaid with her head off, and she is, and here's a cow, but the cow is red. That you'll see with Chagall is typical. He doesn't necessarily follow the natural colors of the objects, but he uses color very effectively in his work. This is that painting that was on his easel in the previous painting, self-portrait, and it shows here's the milkmaid here. It's very Cubist style. Sorry. And here's the red cow in red, and there's a calf there, and it looks like a child also drinking the milk. But also notice another thing. Where's the cow? It's not in a field. It's on the top of a roof. And you'll see Chagall quite often puts characters, animals, lovers on rooftops. And I'll explain about that in a moment. But also notice the brilliant colors he has.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Can somebody mute themselves so we don't get side-eyed? Oh, okay. So that's the painting in the painting of his self-portrait. Coming back to his self-portraits, here's one from 1914. This one is also 1914, and this is 1917. And initially, when he came to Paris, as I said, it was tough for him. He didn't speak French. He had to learn the language. He eventually moved to a place called La Ruche, R-U-C-H-E, where a lot of artists shared studios. I'll show you that in a moment. And it was a sort of artists' commune. And over the next 3 years, between 1911 and 1914, he created some of the most outstanding works of his career. This one is called the self-portrait with the white collar. This is a self-portrait in front of a house. It looks like a wooden house that he might have lived in Vitebsk. He's here with a bow tie and a jacket, very respectably dressed. And in this one, which was after he had returned to Russia, shows him with his artist's palette. But look at the color of the palette, that is orange. No artist's palette is orange, but he uses brilliant colors that not necessarily the color that they are naturally, but it creates a wonderful painting. And you see the painting includes a view of Vitebsk, but Vitebsk has been turned 90 degrees. Perhaps it's because it's on the easel, but he's got it at right angles to the way it should be. Here are some more of his self-portraits. The 1920 was his grimacings and others are smiling. One, he's adorned with a hat, and this is a scratch lithography. What happened when he was caught in Vitebsk with the beginning of the First World War was that he couldn't return, but he had already been exposed to Western art in Paris and had gained something of a reputation. Some of his art had been shown in Berlin and as well as in Paris. And when the Russian Revolution occurred in 1917, he was friends with somebody in the government and was made a commissar for art in Vitebsk. Now, this was really a very rapid promotion because he was still quite young, and it enabled him to teach young people art. And he brought other Russian artists to Vitebsk, including Malevich, who was the leader of a whole school of art called Suprematism. And he also brought L. Lissitzky, and their art was really abstract art, especially Malevich, and they didn't really get on, and eventually it was Chagall who left and returned to Paris. Let me show you some more of his self-portraits. And this is very lush and beautiful artworks, which is swirly and dreamy. And he has put himself in this artwork. Here he is, the painter at his easel. And in his unique language of color and imagery, he unapologetically expresses the joy and the pain and the wonder of life. And he's totally avant-garde. Cubism, with its unemotional, abstract aesthetic, he's more naive or primitive, but Chagall stood apart from other styles. He was rooted in his own voice. which was a blend of Jewish folklore, hometown memories, and his personal artistic style. And from the time of his first show in Berlin, before World War I, when he was still unknown, artists have been moved by the work of Chagall. Let me also make a comment on how my slides are arranged. I sort of color code. Usually, the title is in red. So this is Marc Chagall because it's a self-portrait here and here. He's put himself as the angel and here as the artist, which he is. And then usually the description of the artwork is in blue, and then in a brick red color, I usually include where the painting is. If it's in a private collection, I'll say so. If it is in a museum, I'll try and give you the identification of that museum. So these are paintings he did. The Annunciation was during his period while he was back in Russia. The Angel with the Palette was after he had returned to Paris, and he painted a lot of angels in his work, and a lot of animals. You can see here a cow, and here there's an angel too. So these are some of his paintings where he has included himself. Now, his great love was Bella, who he married. He first met her when he was a student in St. Petersburg, and she was a student at the university. And it was love at first sight, and they eventually became engaged. Her parents didn't particularly like the idea of her marrying an artist because they didn't think that was a profession where he could make a living, but he did eventually, of course. But he was very poor during his early Paris period, and eventually, of course, he became very successful, both financially and artistically. But anyway, Bella was his great love, and she wrote stories and had a diary, and she kept a small hardcover book. Unfortunately, in 1944, when they were in New York, when they had fled France from the Nazis, and she died of an acute viral infection, and Chagall appropriated her notebook as his sketchbook and used that for 20 years. So these little sketches here, they're not paintings, they're little sketches that were in the book that his beloved Bella had, and he took that. So these are some of his sketches, and you can see they are done in pen and ink, or sometimes in pencil, and then he's colored them here. This looks like crayon. Could be crayon, or anyway, and this looks like a pen and ink drawing. These now are later drawings, paintings. 1952, this is a drawing of him looking directly at the viewer, and he's wearing here a checkered jacket, and he's almost has almond eyes here. And on the wall, you can see a clock. That's, of course, symbolic of time. And also a woman upside down. So when you're going to see Chagall's art, you will see people vertical, horizontal, or turned upside down. So this is a foretaste of some of the things that Chagall is known for. People don't necessarily, are not necessarily standing up 90 degrees vertically, but sometimes they are. In the 1965 portrait, which is really very characteristic of Chagall's style, you can see his curly hair. He depicts himself with a jacket and a bow tie. He's 78 years old in 1965. Clearly, you know, he's a painter because he's got his palette and his paints in his hand. And here is a woman on his right, which possibly is Bella, his first wife. After she died in 1944, he had a girlfriend who fathered a son, and but she left him for an older man, and then he married again. That was the first. Mrs. McNeil, who he had an affair with and had a son with. He never married, but then he did marry again in his later years. Okay. And now we're coming to the end of the self-portraits. This here is shows him in profile with unruly hair. Here is unruly hair, and he's painting King David. And that was, of course, King David is characteristically shown with a lyre or harp, and he did a whole series of illustrations for the Bible, as I told you when we were talking about the reading list. So that was from 1955, and here is a self-portrait that was commissioned, or he was invited to donate a self-portrait to the Uffizi Gallery. The Uffizi Gallery is a famous gallery in Florence, Italy, and it has a corridor called the Vasari corridor, and in that corridor are self-portraits by famous artists, and many of the artists, of course, in that corridor were long dead before the painting was acquired by the Uffizi Gallery. But if it was a contemporary or a living artist, he had to be invited to submit a self-portrait. Well, this is the one that Chagall chose to illustrate, to show himself, and it shows. Here's the self-portrait part of it. You can recognize him, and here is his palette in his hand and his paintbrushes. But he shows what he is known for. Well, Paris was like his second home. And here are the bridges over the Seine, and here's the Notre Dame Church, which anchors this painting as in Paris. and this probably is the Eiffel Tower somewhere, and it shows a woman, probably Bella, who was the love of his life, and also a rooster. And we'll talk later about the different symbols that he uses in his paintings. But you'll see lots of roosters, cows, fish, and other animals in his paintings. And this is the last of the self-portraits. Oh no, I've got a few more. This is here. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. It shows my life, ma vie. Here he's in profile with a horse on his left and a donkey. Oh, no, it's not a horse, it's a donkey, I'm sorry. And a nude model. The nude model is here. And this is a favorite subject of his. He likes to include nudes. The second self-portrait here is full face, and it shows him with as the artist, and here he is with two faces, one looking at the equestrian riding a horse, which is typical of the circus. And we'll see a lot of circus paintings later on. And with his other face, he's looking at his palette. So this shows he has interests besides just painting. It doesn't mean he's two-faced. It means he has multiple interests. And this is from a private collection, a pen and ink drawing of him. And I've tried to summarize what sort of a man Chagall is or was, and he was complex, like most of us are. In one respect, he was shy, but he was also brazen. He was simple, but he was also shrewd. He was naive and he was sophisticated. He was stingy, but he could also be very generous. He was calculating and spontaneous, witty and melancholic, and very sensitive to criticism. In his My Life, his autobiography, says, "My paintings are my memories." Chagall, his paintings arouse emotion using nostalgic symbolism. Now, some critics accuse him of constantly repeating himself in his late works for commercial reasons. Certain subjects that he painted again and again. He was a painter of dreamscapes. He was the fiddler on the roof of modern painting. And it's impossible to imagine art history without Chagall's unique contribution to the 20th century. Okay, this is a good time to stop and see if there are any questions. We're about halfway through this afternoon's well, I certainly have covered a lot of his work by just showing his self-portraits, which, as you saw, extend over a lifetime. No questions? Okay, well, we'll go on to some of his Russian paintings. And this is shows a woman here with a basket of yarn here, and was probably begun in Vitebsk while he was still under his teacher in Vitebsk was a man called Penn, but it was finished in St. Petersburg, where he went to art school. And you notice something. The predominant colors are black, brown, red. They're all dark colors. And that is characteristic of the Russian art of that period. So he painted in the manner that he was exposed to in Vitebsk and then later on in St. Petersburg. But this was in 1906, 1907. I said he was the eldest of 9 children, so instead of paying a model to sit for him, he used his sister Mariaska. While he was by 1907 he had moved to St. Petersburg and was a student there, where he attended Yehuda Penn's art school. And it's one of his earliest works. And it testifies to a newfound confidence that he developed after he had gone to St. Petersburg. And the girl is seen on a couch, her legs sort of coquettishly crossed, wearing a black beret. And there's a decorative sort of flatness and blurred distinction between the figure and the blanket. There are soft, round lines contouring her body, and the predominant color, again, is black and dark, and none of this can conceal, of course, that technically it's not a very good work. The portrayal of the legs is not very skillful. So it's his early work, and you by showing this particular work, it's not because it's one of his best. It isn't by any means, but it shows you his growth when I show you later on how, when he came to Paris, he really developed and became a much better artist. Now, I'm going to give you a few definitions because we're going to use some terms, and I hope you will understand them. They have been used to describe or categorize art, including Marc Chagall's works, and I'll show you, how these terms fit in. Genre painting is a style of painting that depicts scenes from ordinary everyday life, especially domestic situations. And it's people may be at work or at play. They may be celebrating weddings, birthdays, saints' days, whatever. And they're always depicted in a generally realistic manner. And the genre painting is associated particularly with the 16th and 17th century Dutch and Flemish artists. But it also extends to modern and contemporary art. Some of you may have taken my class on the golden age of Dutch painting and on the last course we gave on Flemish art. But the reason that this genre painting started with the Dutch and Flemish is that the Dutch were a republic long before other European countries. And prior to that, most portrait paintings were of the wealthy, the nobility, the church. And the Dutch were the first to just paint ordinary people.
Professor.
Yes.
We have a couple of questions. I didn't know what I should ask you, but
yes, no, we can stop and then we'll take a 10-minute break. So
okay. Do you want to have the questions now, since there were things you were kind of talking about?
Let me finish with the folk art, and then I'll take the questions. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So that's genre painting, just ordinary people, and folk art reflects the cultural life of a community. The art form encompasses an expressive culture associated with fields of folklore and cultural heritage. So he used both. His work or some of his work has been described as genre painting or folk art, and I wanted to explain that to you. Now let's take some questions and then take a break.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff. I see.
Okay, I had some questions about the early self-portraits, especially. Was he doing those for selling them, or was he doing them just for practice and fun, and because all artists just do that kind of stuff?
I think.
And then I have another question about, was Bella Jewish? Was she? And how did she get to St. Petersburg?
Okay. She was from Vitebsk. I'll answer that question. She's from Vitebsk. She was definitely Jewish. There was very little intermarriage at that time in the Jewish and Russian Orthodox communities. But she was, her family, her father was a very successful jeweler, and so he could afford to send her to the university in St. Petersburg, and she was a university student when they met, they met, and it was love at first sight, and until she died, he was very much monogamous in that respect, unlike his contemporary Picasso, who of course had multiple wives and mistresses. Now, the first part of your question was, did he paint self-portraits for a living, or was it just to keep himself busy? I gave a whole 2 courses on self-portraiture because there's so many self-portraits. First of all, practically every art student at some stage is asked or invited or expected to do a self-portrait. And secondly, because art students don't have the money to pay models, it's a very good way of learning portraiture. You have to have a good mirror. Van Gogh, who did, he and Rembrandt did literally hundreds of self-portraits. They first of all, Van Gogh brother paid for a good mirror. You need a good, not a cheap mirror, a really good mirror to do that. But you also have to remember that everything you paint from the mirror is a reverse reflection, so that when they're holding something in the right hand, like your paintbrush, it looks like you're painting left-handedly in the mirror. But anyway, no, I think most painters who do self-portraits do it because they keep it as a record, and sometimes people will want to buy it. Certainly, a Rembrandt self-portrait, if you had one, would be worth a lot.
Well, I was noticing in his self-portraits that they're all different styles. There's one that looks like Matisse. There's one that looks like you mentioned, Picasso, Cubist. He has one that just looks like a regular portrait, like I'm just trying to paint myself, accurately. So
right.
it looks like practicing different styles.
I think you have to understand those self-portraits I showed were over his lifetime. So he certainly tried out different styles. As I said, he tried Cubism. He tried Fauvism when he came to Paris. And some people say he was the first surrealist because he painted people upside down and side, but he, I think he that's one characteristic of Chagall, is that he tried a lot of different things. But I don't think his self-portraits were done specifically for commercial sale. He did a lot of paintings that art critics say are repetitive, and that he cashed in on his popularity. And you may agree with it, you may not agree with it. I'll show you paintings that you can say both ways. But in any case, I think he did try a lot of different techniques: etching, watercolor, a lot of different styles, but he had his own style ultimately. I think. Are there any more questions? Because if not,
I have one more.
Okay, one more, and then we'll take a break.
Ernie, can you stop sharing so they can actually see you right now? That since we're not talking about your slide, that would help them. Students.
Yes. I have to do escape, and then I can wait there.
No, you got to do here. I can do it for you.
Your screen, new share, or what do I do? Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay. So I do have another question. Well, I have a comment from Fred Diaz. Beautiful job, Ernie. I really am enjoying this. Great pictures. I have a question from Isabel. Please share your take on Chagall treatment of his eyes in his self-portraits. They are extreme. They are very extreme.
Yes, they look almond. They're described as almond eyes. I don't know why he chose to do that. When he does his hair, it's definitely very curly, and that's very realistic. I don't think his eyes were that almond shaped, but in some of his self-portraits, they are shown in that shape, yes. Okay.
I think that's it.
Yes, it's 1 minute to 2. Let's, at 9 minutes past, let's resume, okay?
Perfect. We'll see you guys in about 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. And then if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get to them after the break.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. There probably wasn't that much commercial selling of his paintings. I will show you the painting after this was the first one that he sold. And that was to a Jewish a liberal lawyer who was a member of the Duma, the parliament in Russia. And that was his first sale. I don't think he had an agent there. It was just that when he was in St. Petersburg, he knew this Max Vinova, the lawyer who bought his first painting from him. But he did have an agent in Paris, and I'll tell you about that when we get to it. We're jumping the gun on that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Another question. Fred Diaz, when did Chagall start creating stained glass windows, which were so stunning?
Oh, he was in his late 60s, early 70s when he started doing that, which would be about in 1950s when he started doing stained glass. And he collaborated with a stained glass maker in France who had a lot of experience in that. And that was a very fortunate for him because, it was a new method for him, even though stained glass has been around for ages. He was a novice at that, but he had the good sense to couple up with a expert. The guy's name was Mark. And we'll come to that towards the end of the course when we talk about that. It's a little bit like Matisse when he did his cutouts after he couldn't hold the paintbrush steadily anymore. He switched to cutouts. As he was getting older, he adapted and did different things. So let's go on with the dead man. We're still talking about his Russian paintings that he did while he was in Russia. This is painted in 1908, and he had returned from St. Petersburg to Vitebsk, and he was a little down and dejected. And he painted the dead man in that year when he'd come home from St. Petersburg for a break and was in Vitebsk. And he introduced motifs and elements of style that persist throughout his career. What you notice probably first is the Fiddler on the Roof. This was way before, sorry. I'm having trouble with the pointer. Here's the pointer here. You notice this painter here this fiddler is playing the violin on the roof. And you see a street and a woman screaming with her hands raised, a white dress. And behind her is a street sweeper, sort of oblivious of what is going on. And there is a dead man here surrounded by candles. Well, what is this all about? It's Chagall's rendition of a memory that he had from childhood when he noticed a woman screaming in the street for help with her dying husband. And of course, he did die and was beyond help. And she presumably put the candles around. But in general, the painting is rather murky. And yet, it's a sort of dark painting perhaps like an Edvard Munch, the Norwegian painter, rather than a typical Chagall painting, but his vibrant colors and paintings that you saw some of in the self-portraits came later. And why is this fiddler on the roof? Well, according to Chagall's autobiography, My Life, it wasn't unusual in Vitebsk for people to escape to the rooftop in times of danger or excitement, or simply to get away from it all. And why you see also here a boot hanging from this house. What's that about? Well, it's reminiscent of a shop sign? No. It's one of Chagall's uncles played the violin like a cobbler. A cobbler is a shoemaker or shoe repairman, and who probably is not an expert in playing in the violin. So that expression, playing like a cobbler, is that his uncle was a lousy violinist. That's what that's about. But the Dead Man is the first painting I know of with a fiddler on the roof. It's not the first painting. I'll show you later on other early Italian paintings way before Chagall with figures on the roof, but it's certainly the first fiddler on the roof, and presumably the musical that is made of the play and book comes from this idea of the fiddler on the roof. The Dead Man shows a corpse stretched out on the street in sad solemnity, and his face is illuminated with 6 candles, and he seems to be barefoot. So this is one of his very early Russian paintings. This is more like a folk painting. It's called The Russian Wedding. And what you see here, this was painted while he was in St. Petersburg, 1909. And it was the first painting that Chagall sold to his patron, Max Vinova, a liberal lawyer and one of the first Jewish members of the Duma, the Russian Assembly. And although this work appears to be a genre painting, it also reflects on what was going on in his own personal life, as he had just met Bella Rosenfeld, who he fell in love with, and she fell in love with him. And 4 years later, they got married. 4 or 5 years later, they got married. And what you see here, we see the wedding couple, the bride in a white wedding gown, and the groom with a black overcoat and a Homburg hat, it looks like, and the family procession behind it. And here we see a fiddler leading the procession. Also, you see the neighborhood has turned out. They're watching what's going on. Here's a water carrier. Here's some children. They're watching this, and it has been described as naive or primitive art, but I think it was his first painting that he sold, again, the colors are brown and black and darkish. You see when he goes to Paris how his palette, the colors are much brighter. But we're still in Russia, and here is the red nude sitting up. It's a bold and striking painting. which he created in 1908 when he was just 22 and studying in St. Petersburg. And it's of a young woman who's seated with one leg tucked under the other. And it's actually of Thea Brackman, who was a student who was believed to be a girlfriend of Chagall at the time. Brackman was both confident and well-educated, and these personality traits have been captured in the painting, with the sitter staring at the viewer without apology. The limbs are strong, and the positioning of the bent leg is very reminiscent of nudes by Henri Matisse. Chagall was introduced to works of Matisse during his time in St. Petersburg, and Chagall is known for his strong color. And this painting is almost all red, except for this green plant here on the side. But what he's done, he uses different shades of red and pinkish. But red, of course, is the color of Russia and the color of passion. And it has symbolism, and Chagall was aware of that. And what stands out, because he uses a black outline for contrast, is you see how you get the waistline here by this outline here, and the nape of her neck by using the black contrast to the red. It fills the canvas, and there's nothing shy and awkward about the sitter. She's totally comfortable with her nudity, and interesting, this small plant here on the side on the right. The color green is used, the opposite tone of red, for the rest of the image. In the same year as he did this painting of Thea Brackman, he also painted Bella Rosenfeld. He had just met her afterwards. This was in 1909. This was in 1908, and it was at a wedding, and they fell in love at the time. She was 19, and he was in his 20s. Notice she's wearing black gloves and a white dress, very different from the nude sitting up. And this is another nude that he painted when he was in Paris, and you notice the difference in colors now and the difference in his palette. So he went to Paris in 1910. Now, this is an unusual topic for a painter to do, but it's called birth. And he did two versions of it. One in Russia in 1910, before he left for Paris, and then he did another version in 1912 in Paris. The description that he gives of the event, this was when his David, his younger brother, was born. And in the My Life, the book that I said was on the reading list, or his autobiography, he describes this event. He says, the house was full of women decked in their best clothes and grave men, noise, whispering, all of a sudden, the piercing wail of a newborn babe, mama half naked, pale with faint flush on her cheeks is in bed. My young brother had just been born. So that was from his autobiography. And what you see here is rather dramatic lighting of the scene. The mother is obviously the sheets are bloodstained from the birth, and the midwife is holding, rather awkwardly holding, the newborn baby, his brother, and he uses again red covering the bed canopy, and this is like a stage set. And as I mentioned, one of his teachers was a stage set designer. So it is a stage set. And interesting, this image of a mother and baby child, and here's the father under the bed, probably freaked out, I don't know. But anyway, and the neighbors coming in with the cattle and sharing the joy of the event. And comment on this is a traditional cast of a Christian nativity, the Holy Family and the herdsman coming to share the event. So this isn't just a Jewish birth, it is also very much in the Christian tradition. Then looking at his painting the same event after he is in Paris, look at the difference in the colors. See, these are the Russian colors, the brown, the black, red, dark colors. Now, this is quite a different version. We still have the mother and the midwife and the baby, and here are the neighbors here. And here's the family in an adjacent room, it's a topsy-turvy perspective and almost a circus-like atmosphere. And of course, he loved the circus and did a lot of circus paintings later on. Here, there seems to be a donkey sitting at a table. This is it gives you a foretaste of what Chagall, the style and the manner that he painted on in later. And you see a sort of a starry sky, and it's at once modern and it's also folkloric. This is a painting he did before he left Russia to go to Paris. And it shows a family on Friday night, Sabbath. They've had their dinner. The mother is standing in the doorway. Everybody else is sort of pooped. They're sitting, sleeping. But this guy here, who's sort of, his head is twisted around, that's a typical Chagall technique. He has people flying upside down, sideways, and here this certainly he must be he must have twisted his neck to look around, but and the stars are coming through the window. It's a bucolic scene in a way. Now, I want to say something about different styles because we're at the stage where he's left or leaving Russia to come to Paris, and he's going to encounter different styles. And one of them is Fauvism. Fauvism refers to a novel style in painting that characterizes the work of a close circle of French artists. And that was primarily structured around Henri Matisse, but also indirectly influenced by Raoul Dufy, Georges Braque, and Georges Raoult. And it had a fairly short life from about 1904 to 1908, but Chagall used these same brilliant colors as the Fauvists did, and it grew out of Impressionism. And Fauvism preferred a simple and less naturalistic form of expression. The genre's followers adopted an intricate arrangement of cold and warm colors and a creation of decorative compositions. Fauvism is not technically a movement, as there were no written guidelines or manifestos, no membership entries, and no exclusive group exhibitions, but rather a periodization. So I picked probably one of the most famous Fauvist paintings by Matisse, which is here at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And undoubtedly, all you art lovers have already seen this. But this was, people have said that Chagall painted in a Fauvist style. Well, he didn't go into any style, but he certainly did paint with a very unusual colors. I mean, people's faces aren't green, but both here in the Matisse and here in this Jarlenski painting, you see these bright colors. The reason I showed Jarlenski was he was actually a German. He was from Russia originally, Alexei von Jarlenski, but he spent a lot of time in Germany, in Munich, and was staying with Kandinsky, and he was with the Blaue Reiter. And some of you may remember I did a class on German Expressionism, and I just wanted to show that Fauvism wasn't limited to France. This Jarlenski was a Russian painting in Germany. Of course, the Nazis considered in 1933 considered any paintings of this type as degenerate art, and sold. This painting, I didn't give a gallery. It was sold this year in 2024 by Christie's, famous art auction house, and to an undisclosed buyer. So it's in a private collection. We don't know who has it now. The other great art movement at the time that Chagall came to Paris was, of course, Cubism. And it's an early 20th century avant-garde art movement that revolutionized European art and sculpture as well. And in Cubist works of art, the subject is analyzed and broken up in the perspective, and the artist depicts the subject from multiple perspectives and represents the recombination by the artist of what he sees. It was pioneered by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, and joined by many others, including Robert Delaunay and Jean Gris and Ferdinand Léger. And one primary influence that led Cubism was the representation of three-dimensional form in the late works of Paul Cézanne. So here is quite a well-known painting by Pablo Picasso of a girl with a mandolin as an example of Cubism. And finally, if we're talking about art styles, there is Surrealism. And the term Surrealism originated by Guillaume Apollinaire, who, of course, Chagall was friendly with Apollinaire. He invented the term in 1917, but the movement known as Surrealism really started in 1924, and one of the leaders was René Magritte. And the painting of the pipe is by Magritte, and also the painting of the treachery of images, this one here from 1928. And Salvador Dali is also considered one of the leading surrealists. And I would add Hieronymus Bosch, although nobody calls him a surrealist, painted in the style of surrealism, which was important in including irrational and absurd subjects and characteristically, a surreal work involves a dreamlike scene or a symbolic image or the unexpected, illogical juxtapositions. And certainly you find that in Chagall's work, and the bizarre assemblage of ordinary objects. So, of course, the reason Magritte says this isn't, ce n'est pas une pipe, this isn't a pipe, it represents a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe, but it's a painting, it's not a pipe. That's his point. So that's that. We have a few more, and then we're ready to take more questions. This is a painting that Chagall did when he went to Paris in his first studio, the art studio, the atelier, the studio, and it's in the heart of Montparnasse, and you don't have perspective, but you have finishing lines, as here and here at the blanket over the couch. It's a messy apartment. He wasn't neat and tidy at home, but you can see him handling with broad and heavy brush strokes, and that's perhaps a Van Gogh influence. And look at the colors, the bright red empty frame for a painting, and the chairs, and the very strong colors. And why I say it's a homage in honor of Van Gogh is here's this famous painting by Van Gogh of his studio in Arles. And if you notice, in his Paris studio, he has one painting that you just saw before. It is not in sharp detail, but you remember I showed you My Fiancé in Black. I'm sorry. My Fiancé in Black Gloves of Bella Rosenfeld. That's that painting that you saw before. And here, after he had lived in that apartment in Montparnasse for a year, he moved to La Ruche. La Ruche means the beehive, and it was a central building in a duodecanal wooden pavilion. That means 12-sided pavilion. And this was one of the places that gave Paris its reputation as an art metropolis. Painters and sculptors from all over the world in quest of international careers. Workshops were erected. See, these are different workshops here. Were erected to serve as exhibition space for the artists, and it opened in 1905. And sculptors and painters arrived from across Europe. Rents were low even then. Boucher, the owner, was patient when an artist could not pay. There were French, such as Ferdinand Léger, but mostly were migrants from Eastern Europe, Osip Sadkin, Marc Chagall, Jacques Lipchitz, Pinchas Kremen. And in 1908, the year Cubism began, Ferdinand Léger, a Frenchman, moved into La Ruche, and there he soon found himself in the center of an avant-garde art circle. Léger soon got to know the artists, Robert Delaunay, Marc Chagall, Chaim Soutine, Jacques Lipchitz, Henri Laurent, and poets like Guillaume Apollinaire and Max Jacob. Chagall thrived in this creative atmosphere and cheap rent of La Ruche, living without running water in unheated studios. He sold his work for a few francs just to buy food. Most of Chagall's neighbors at La Ruche were Jewish, often fleeing the pogroms of Central and Eastern Europe. No matter how tough their lives were, at least they could keep homesickness at bay by socializing in Yiddish. Okay, any more questions?
Let's see. Go ahead, Jeff. I'm going to let you unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation today. The timing of Chagall in Paris reminds me of Gertrude Stein's salon. And I wondered if there was any interaction between Chagall and the Steins, she and her brother. I can't remember her brother's name.
Yeah. I haven't read my life from cover to cover, and that was only until 1920, 21, 22. So, but I haven't found any reference to Gertrude Stein, although she, of course, was a big promoter of the modern art, and I'm sure she would have known Chagall, but Chagall, I think she was probably when he came, he was poor, and she was wealthy, at least quite well off, and perhaps they didn't move in the same social circle. I don't know.
I mean, she was quite a promoter of Picasso, and her brother loved Matisse, and
yes,
you know, they were patrons basically of those folks. But I wondered, you know, how far their circle went.
I don't know. If you like, I'll try and Google and see if Chagall knew the Steins, but I haven't come across anything that suggests that they knew each other. Although, you know, Paris is a big city, and but the art world, you would think they would have met.
All right. Any other questions, anybody? You can raise your hand. We can call on you. Did he die poor?
We've done 29 slides today. That's about the goal that I have. I have about 230 slides or something like that, and we have 8 weeks, so we have to cover about 28 slides a session, and I have much more in store for you. You asked about stained glass. That's coming towards the end, but I promise you there's a lot more to Chagall that we will see in the coming few weeks.
Perfect. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you. We'll have a good day.
Okay.
Bye, Professor.
All right.